So if you watched my previous videos, then you should already know what rent to own is, at least in Texas. Where you can potentially look for rent to own opportunities. That's a separate video that I made somewhere over there. And then right now we're going to talk about the financial costs of rent to own. The financial costs of rent to own are as follows. You're typically paying a monthly payment, just like you're doing with your rent. None of that monthly payment typically, except for Divvy Homes. In Divvy Homes, there's a slight difference. They do have a savings plan, but in most cases, none of your payment, unlike most people believe, will go toward your down payment. For that reason, you are just in a position that you are right now making monthly payments to your landlord. The costs of rent to own typical costs are, if you're going through Divvy, and I'll have a separate video on Divvy Homes, you might be able to find some homes for rent to own that are under 2,000. Most of them are going to be old, small, old and small. Little bit made, a little bit, dressed up. David does dresses up their homes a little bit, but old and small. And that's just life. Right now, the cost of housing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area is not cheap, and rent to own by definition is more expensive than regular renting. Yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to mention. I will have a whole video on rent to own kind of myths and truths. One of the myth about rent to own that somehow it's cheaper than renting. I would say quite the opposite. Typically, it is much more expensive than renting because your rents typically are geared towards smaller dinkier properties. Typically, they're condos, townhomes, duplexes. You don't want to own a condo, you don't want to own townhome, you want a regular house, right? So the costs are higher. Plus, when you're renting in a condo, you're sharing roofs, foundations, walls, tree services, trash services, water services, you name it, with trillion of other people. Therefore, you have shared cost of ownership of those items. Therefore, your rent is smaller. That's why it is cheaper to rent very often, especially in a townhome or in a condo situation than it is to own. Because when you own, you have a separate AC, separate roof, separate water line, separate sewer system, separate electrical, separate everything, and that costs. And if you want them separate, then of course you have to figure out that it's going to be more expensive than joint services. Long story short, let's talk again about rent to own costs. So there's only one true cost that is invariable, and this is your rental payment. I would say prepare yourself for anywhere between 2,000, 2,300, 2,500, and up. The smaller the monthly payment, the older and the dinkier or further away is the house. So if your house is somewhere in Forney, it might be newer. If you want the house in Irving or, someplace like more central, it will be more expensive. That's how life operates, right? Everything more convenient is typically more expensive. So you have your usual rent payment. So let's just say, very hypothetically, your rent payment is $2,500. What else do you have costs on? It depends on your rent to own agreement. If your rent to own agreement makes you in charge of the repairs, then typically you will have some responsibility for repairs, especially small repairs that are not covered by your landlord's insurance. If you have a savings plan, so I don't know of any other program but Divvy Homes. I spoke about Divvy Homes briefly in my previous video. And I will speak about Divvy Homes programs again. Divvy Homes program is unique in a way that they are offering you to have a savings plan, which means that, let's just say that your monthly payment is $2,500. They can force you, sometimes you can choose it, and sometimes they force you to put an extra $300, $400, $500, $600 per month into that saving plan because they feel like you will need that money for your down payment once you're ready to purchase the house. Typically, there is also a down payment. So when you move into the rent-to-own property, they will expect an option fee. Okay, if you're going through Divvy, I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth, but things come up in my mind and I don't want to forget to mention them. If you're going through Divvy Homes, which is the most standard, the oldest, most standard trusted program, you will have a $500 application fee, I think five, that is refundable if you don't proceed with the program. But once you make an offer on a house, you lost that money in most cases. So you have the $500 initial processing fee. Application fee is free, at least with Divvy Homes. Once you decide that you're qualified, once the Divvy Homes decide that you're qualified and ready to move forward, you will have to pay a $500 application fee before you can start viewing any homes. Then after you like the house for which you're qualified for, you have the budget for it, then Divvy Homes will make you to pay 2%, typically 2%, depending on your credit score. If your credit score is high, it could be as low as 1%. If your credit score is a little bit lower, then typically 2% of the sale price of the property as your non-refundable option fee. So it becomes both your deposit and your part of your down payment in the future. And you can lose that by exiting the program. So let's just say your let's just say that your option fee is $7,000. You give it to Divvy Homes, that is non-refundable. If you exit the program, then Divvy Homes keeps your $7,000 and you lose that. Unlike a deposit, you cannot get it back just because you left the property clean and taken care of. So you have the option fee, which we will call down payment, if that helps you to understand that concept easier. And then you have the first month's payment. So before you move into Divvy Home, and I'm specifically talking about Divvy Homes, you'll need to pay $500 in the application fee, 2% typically, let's just stick with 2% for now, of the house price in your option fee slash deposit, minus 500. They will count that 500 toward your deposit. And then the first month's rent. Let's just say that your first month's rent is 2,500. Okay. So in that case, you have 500, then another, let's just say 7,000 minus 500, and then 2,500 on top of that. So you're like, you can expect anywhere between $7,000 and $10,000 that you will need to have on hand in order to start the process. Now, if you don't have a big down payment right now, that's okay. That's why I'm giving you this information so you could start saving money toward the goals, life goals that you have. So if you don't have that money, don't panic. Just start saving for it, because like your car or your laptop or anything else, probably money didn't appear from the air. You probably needed to save up for it, and you're going to do the same thing with the down payment. A little bit of discipline, a little bit of extra shifts at work. You should save up for the down payment within a few months. And then once you start renting, your contract will tell you if you're responsible for any repairs on top of your monthly payment. If you are, read through that information, very carefully before you sign a contract. Then once you're starting to rent, then you're just paying your rent plus whatever additional expenses your contract says. And then at the end of your renting period, which could be anywhere between 1 and 3 years, you will need to come up with an additional money for a down payment. So your down payment might be zero. If your credit scores go up high enough that you can qualify for a down payment assistance option, or your down payment could be anywhere between 3.5% to 10% of the home price, out of which the 2% or 3% or whatever, however much you gave to your rent-to-own owner before you started the process, that money should not be spent. It should become part of your down payment. So if your down payment is, let's just say 3.5%, then you already have 2% sitting in the escrow account somewhere waiting for you to be used for the down payment, and you're just saving up toward the last 1.5% plus the closing costs. So when you're purchasing the home, depending on which loan program you use, your down payment will vary. Your closing costs will vary as well. It's very hard to predict without knowing your situation or what kind of type of loan you're going to have. But I would say, to be on the safe side, count on 5% down payment in total. That would include whatever amount of money you gave to your rent-to-own owner program beforehand and whatever you were able to save while you're renting. So 5% down payment plus closing costs. Closing costs could be anywhere between, let's just say, $3,000 and $10,000 additional, depending on the price of your home, the taxes in the area, the insurance that you're going to get, etc., etc., etc. So as you can see, ownership of the home is not exactly cheap, but it is what it is. That's, housing is just more expensive than it was in a bygone era of our grandmas and grandfathers. That's it for now. I hope I was clear enough on. Oh, okay. That was Divvy Homes. So we will now mainly discuss Divvy Homes. If you're dealing with an individual owner, let's just say that individual owner is somebody whom you know or somebody whom we found through search of tired landlords or people who tried to sell but couldn't. With them, you can have a lower down payment if you could negotiate it, but unfortunately, that doesn't help you at all because your down payment doesn't come from your landlord. Your down payment comes from your lender. So the landlord, even if he accepts only 1% down payment up front, that just means so much more for you to figure out how to save up for later when you actually have to get into a loan. There are no such things as cheap rent-to-own options. If somebody is advertising a cheap rent-to-own option, I would immediately suspect a scam. There are no rent-to-own options with no money down. If somebody advertises that, most likely it is a scam. There is no such thing as rent-to-own option where most of your payment goes toward the cost of the house. If somebody is advertising it, most likely it's a scam. Trying to think what else. I think that's it for now. My name is Elena Garrett, and my contact information is in the description below. I am a realtor who happened to specialize in rent-to-own options in North Texas. So I probably tried every single rent-to-own program that there is or was in Texas, except for a couple of private programs. So if you have questions about things like Utopia Homes, Divvy Homes, this kind of homes, that kind of homes, contact me separately. Chances are I probably know what that program does and whether or not that program actually delivers on what it's supposed to deliver upon. Thank you so much for sticking around. The next video that I'm going to do is going to be common misconceptions about rent-to-own programs because many people have wild misconceptions about rent-to-own programs. I'm going to go over the one that I see the most frequent, and then we're going to move on after that on price ranges, like what can you expect from different price ranges in rent-to-own. I'll see you guys in the next video. Enjoy your day.